Hello, welcome to American Baker in Germany. I'm Michelle, and today we are making a princess-themed cake. I should probably say princesses-themed cake because we are doing more than one. I have two daughters. When you have girls, you tend to have all of the possible princess films that there are, and we are no exception to that. So today we are making 4 different princesses in one cake. I will show you how you can do that. And we are making Snow White, Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, and Belle. I'm very excited about this today, and let's get started. I started out making the toppers for the 4 princesses a few days before to let them dry. I started with the apple for Snow White. I rolled it into a ball and extended it slightly to make it longer. Then I used a pointed fondant tool to make a dent in the top and 5 indents in the bottom. Then I made the stem with a small piece of chocolate fondant. And I stuck it in the top with edible glue. Then I cut out a small leaf out of green fondant with a small circle cutter, flattening it with my fingers and texturing it with the fondant tool. Then I stuck it on with edible glue and set the apple aside. Next, I want to make Cinderella's glass slipper. I used a piece of leftover 50-50 mixture of gum paste mixed with white fondant. While looking at an image of a shoe, I made a log shape and cut out a piece to make it look like a ballet slipper shape. I used a small ball tool to round out the opening and make it more shoe-like. Then I rolled a thin log to form it into a heel. I cut it to size and stuck it on with edible glue. I thought I would need the round piping tip to let it dry on, so the shoe didn't collapse, but it turned out to be stable enough not to need it. I softened the edges just slightly with the pointed fondant tool, then set it aside to dry. Next, I used my 50-50 mixture again, rolling it out this time. And using a photo for reference, I cut out the shape of a crown with a diamond shape in the middle and tapering down on both sides. I softened the edges with the fondant tool and wrap it around the handle of a rolling pin to allow it to dry in a ring shape. I stuck the 2 edges together with edible glue and set it aside to dry. Now I want to make a crimson rose. I took a piece of red fondant and added some black gel food coloring. Now either my black food coloring had gone bad or I didn't use enough because it actually made my fondant lighter than it was before. So I added some red gel food coloring to get it back to the color it was at the beginning. Then I rolled it out and cut out a handful of circles. This time I decided to try something different than the way I made the fondant rose in the buttercream fruit and flowers cake. This time I'm using a technique called a ribbon rose. I flatten the petals to look more petal-like and lay them on top of each other, overlapping slightly to form a line. I stuck them together a little better using edible glue and wrap the whole line around my base cone. I use a bit of glue to stick the last petals on, and I roll the edges of the petals toward the outside to allow the rose to bloom. Then I cut out a green star. and squish the arms of the star a bit to make them thinner, and stick it on the bottom of my rose. After some internal debate, I decided I did want an extra bow for Snow White, since she is usually depicted with a bow in her hair. I roll out a piece of red fondant and use a bow cutter. It looks like this, and I'll show you how to use it. These pieces are the tail of the bow. I'm just cleaning up the edges with my knife. This is the main part of the bow, and I fold the edges into the middle and stick them down a bit. Then I wrap this square over the middle of the bow and place it on top of the tails, and stick them together with edible glue and set them aside to dry. Now that the crown and shoe are dry, it's time to paint them. I mix gold luster dust with clear alcohol to make gold paint. If you don't want to use alcohol, you can use almond extract or a lemon extract instead. It's just to make it into a liquid that dries quickly. I give the crown a first coat of gold paint. Now, I thought this was pearl luster dust, but it dissolved into nothing when I added the alcohol. So instead of painting it, I wet the shoe with the alcohol mixture and shook some of what I think was actually sanding sugar to cover the glass slipper and give it some extra shine. Later, I gave the crown another coat of gold paint. Now it's finally time to assemble the cake. I stick down my 6-inch round chocolate cake with a dab of cookie butter buttercream. Then I fill it with a generous amount of cookie butter buttercream and add the top layer. I crumb coat it in the buttercream as well and chill it in the fridge for half an hour. While waiting for the buttercream to set, I decided to knead all of the major fondant colors I'll need to get them elastic. I prepared a light blue, a yellow, a dark blue, and a pink. The pink was lighter than I wanted it, so I added some pink gel food coloring to make it a deeper pink. Then I frosted the cake with more cookie butter buttercream. If you're not familiar with cookie butter, it is made out of cinnamon spice cookies crushed up. It's really delicious. I added it to half of a recipe of my American buttercream for this cake. After my cake is frosted, I used a small spatula to make a mark in the buttercream to divide the cake into 4 pieces, including along the sides. I will use this as a guide. The first thing I do on the cake is a thin piece of white that I roll out and use a tapered tool to create ruffles. I trim it and add it to the bottom of one of the quarters of the cake, trimming it to size. Then, in an adjacent quarter, I roll out a thin strip of red fondant and add it to the middle of the side of one quarter, trimming it to size. Now we can add the actual colors that will be covering the quarters, representing each princess. I roll out a piece of dark blue and trim one side to be a corner that comes to a square. Then, beginning in the center, I drape the piece of fondant over the quarter of the cake. I trim the dark blue to be trim and fitted to the cake. I also trim off the excess that overlapped to the neighboring quarter. I had a hard time trimming the fondant without pulling it out of shape, so I decided to use my box cutter. This tool is extremely sharp and is usually more than I need, but it is a perfect tool if your knife isn't sharp enough to do what you need it to do. Then I cut slits in the dark blue fondant where it was laid over the top of the red to create a gap. Unfortunately, the box cutter is so sharp that I accidentally cut through the red fondant as well. The idea was good, but it didn't quite work for me. To repair the red fondant, I rolled out a bit more red really thin and cut a small piece and tucked the piece in the gap using a tapered fondant tool and my knife. Then I decided it was time to cover the ruffled quarter. I roll out a piece of my yellow fondant the same way I did the dark blue. I drape it over the cake, starting in the middle, and let the fondant fall like fabric down the side. I use my box cutter to trim the yellow above the bottom of the cake to allow the white ruffles to show through at the bottom. I also trim the yellow to stay within its own quarter. Next, I roll out a piece of light blue fondant and drape it the same way I did the yellow. Except this time, I trim the fondant as if it were a piece of fabric that comes down to the floor. Then I do the exact same thing with the pink, filling in the last gap on the cake. I sharpen the edges where the colors meet with a knife. Then I roll out a piece of yellow fondant into a strip. And lay it over 2 paintbrushes and a straw that I only use for baking. After getting the impression that I want, I tuck under the edges and trim it to about the size I need. I use edible glue to help me stick the swag down on the yellow quarter at both ends and in the middle. Then I trim the excess off the sides. Next, I work on the light blue swag. This swag is different from the first because I don't need the 3 humps made by the paintbrushes, but I still tuck the edges under and stick it on the cake with edible glue. And trim off the excess with a knife. With the pink, I roll out a piece of pink and cut out a sash that is a bit triangular in shape, with the largest triangle in the middle. I also stick this on with edible glue and trim off the excess. Lastly, I place the toppers on that I had made beforehand. I place the apple on the dark blue quarter, the rose on the yellow quarter, the glass slipper on the light blue quarter, and the crown on the pink quarter. Then I stuck the red bow on the dark blue quarter with edible glue. I think this is the kind of cake that every little girl who loves princesses will be in love with. It's ideal for the girl who can't decide which princess is her favorite. If I had to choose my favorite quarter, I think it would be Snow White, although Beauty and the Beast turned out lovely as well. This very girly cake is bound to be a hit with any group of girls under 12, and maybe even some over. My first attempt at modeling the glass slipper, I tried to make the shoe together with the heel. The more I worked it, though, the worse it seemed to look. Eventually, I Googled a picture of a glass slipper for reference and decided to completely start over.